Okay, as people kind of come in the room, we will get moving here. I know everybody's on their virtual time crunch. My name is Jeremy Foyet. I am one of the co-founders of NEWaukee. This is a program on the Cloud Cafe, which is our online platform for many different programs to help you find your passion, purpose, other people, and learn more about your place where you live. Today we have our special guest, Michael Uden, who is the Vice Provost and Student Enrollment Engagement at Concordia University. And really, Michael, we're going to talk about kind of the future of college, I guess, and what it looks like in the COVID-19 world, what you guys are going through personally, what you see as trends across maybe the country. And you have a short presentation for us. This can be interactive if you have questions. There is a Q&A section here, or you could post them in the chat, and we will respond to those at the end. All of our programs on the Cloud Cafe are brought to you by Ginger Lazovik at Shorewest Realtors and North Shore Bank. A much love to those sponsors for supporting these online programs, kind of when we need them most, people to connect and people to find belonging. So I'm going to hand it over you to Michael, and you can get started.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity from NEWaukee and Rita and Jeremy for you in hosting this today. I'm gonna pull up my slide deck and we can get started. This is a topic about which I'm truly passionate, as Concordia has been an innovator in meeting the needs of all student types since well before the turn of this century. And the topic, post-COVID college, what will be novel besides the virus? I apologize for the academician's attempt at humor, but I'm really excited to dig in to this topic today. It seems in the past 2 months, discussions have been all things COVID-19, but changes and challenges in higher education have been on the forefront for a while. These realities include, according to work from Gallup, financial challenges, engaging and retaining students, staff, and faculty at the college level, applied learning for students, including employer pipeline relationships and employment opportunities, and ultimately that gets at the pressing question on the return of investment for a college education, and then accessibility and quality of instruction. Like many institutions of higher education, Concordia has been engaged in addressing these areas for some time. COVID has accelerated and accentuated them, however. So how has the design and delivery of college programming been reimagined? We're going to harken back to my days as a middle school language arts teacher this afternoon, and I'll frame my remarks with the mnemonic of learn. If nothing else, an institution of higher education should be all about learning, correct? Well, I'm eager to overview what Concordia has learned and applied in order to meet the broad learning needs of our students in dynamic ways. And so in summary, we're going to ask L, what has been left or has been on the way out for a while? What has entered college programming in the interim? Under A, we'll explore all about the learner and what that looks like in today's college setting. R, how have things become real and fun and really functional? And then the ominous question of now what, or where do we go from here? So what has left or has been on the way out for a while? This may be a characteristic of the college experience that many of us had. We had the professor with all of the knowledge that they attempted to impart to us. And the way to characterize that might be the sage on the stage. Now, the challenge pedagogically and instructionally is that some were able to do that more effectively and successfully than others. The reality is, unless a faculty member had been trained specifically, their default, their toolbox is often they were to teach like they themselves had been taught, and or they used instructional methodology that they themselves liked as a student. And that wasn't always in the best interest of their learners. What we know about learning engagement and retention, however, tells us that we need to activate interest in students at the onset and connect new learning to existing understanding in the learner. That mandates a connection to the student. And so we start to look at student-centric practices. We may characterize that as the guide on the side, and we'll start to explore what that looks like more specifically. So under E, what has entered college programming in the interim? I want to start by establishing that colleges did not simply have a eureka moment about best practices in teaching when the COVID crisis emerged. In order to grow our student engagement and retention ratings, Concordia has invested in this work for some time. We were also fortunate in having a well-established infrastructure for online learning within our extended campus operations, or our ECO team, and our learning management system, or LMS, of Blackboard. So this intentional student-centered focus can look a number of ways. One example is something called the flipped classroom. That's being done K-16 in education right now. What it really tries to focus on is what is the best use of that time in the classroom with the instructor. So we have a faculty member with this great content knowledge. And one of the frustrations I had, and perhaps you had as well as a college student, is we'd have an assignment, maybe a chapter reading, and we'd get to class, and then the faculty member would read the chapter with us or review things that we presumably had already done. And in hindsight, how was that capitalizing on the intellectual capital that he or she possessed? So in a flipped classroom, we approach that differently. Students are given the opportunity to view a pre-recorded lecture on their own before the class session. Perhaps they're doing a series of readings ahead of time, some comparatively rudimentary kinds of content work. But when they get to the classroom and they have that audience with the faculty member who is the expert, they can do something more poignant with it. There could be a simulation, there could be a discussion, there could be some guided practice under the direction of that faculty member. And that's a different kind of intentionality in learning design that can really capitalize on the needs of the student. COVID has forced every faculty member, traditional and adult accelerated, graduate, adjunct, full-time, to grapple with this question, how to make it meaningful for students. And at Concordia, we've also have to consider how we could fully digitize our mind, body, and spirit development for all student types. So we have a number of resources that have been in existence, but they've been deployed in even more ways in the last several months. Our Center for Academic Advising and Career Engagement, or the CASE team, our online student success advisors, the OSA team members, our Academic Resource Center, have all been fully digitized to meet the needs of all students, undergraduate, adult accelerated, and even graduate. What does that look like? It's probably a more personalized touch than you may have had or that I had when I was in school. These team members are connecting with students, sending a message to them directly, just checking in to see how things are going, if they're encountering any obstacles in their learning or even in their life outside of the classroom that may stand in the way of them being able to fully engage as scholars. They're creating in students a focus on their self-efficacy. One of the things we do at Concordia that's a distinctive is to focus on the Clifton Strengths profile of all of our incoming freshmen. So in their first year, they take the Clifton Strengths, they start to learn and unpack what those strengths mean and how those look in real life. We attempt to engage those strengths within their learning experiences working toward a degree, but we also then want to equip them upon graduation in using those strengths as a calling card so that when they engage with prospective employers, they're talking about the value added that they bring. How can they flex those strengths in meaningful ways to be an asset into that organization from day one? We're also challenging students in a liberal arts education to examine truth, to look at the options that exist for them in their program and beyond, and then also the alternatives that would best fit their needs. And that comes out of research from Wiley. In the last few months, we've had to digitize our mental health and spiritual care. So our counseling team and our campus ministry team have also been front and center in new delivery means to our traditional students in particular. We talk about all about the learner and what that can include, recognizing that while faculty are content experts, as I said earlier, not all of them have background and expertise in instructional design. Concordia has been a bit distinctive in that area. We do not outsource our instructional design. All of our instructional designers are employees of Concordia and therefore embrace and embed our mission in all they do. And so what does an instructional designer do? This is a relatively new field in the last 25 to 30 years. And what it requires is front and foremost a needs assessment. So the instructional designer, or ID, is going to really ask the question, what do we want learners to be able to do as a result of this course or as a result of this learning experience? And once that end goal has been identified and articulated, they begin to engage in the development of appropriate learning design and tools. They create those materials. They design that curriculum. They have to collaborate with a lot of stakeholders. Now, who would those stakeholders be? At Concordia, we might be engaging with our academic resource center as we try to utilize a universal design for learning in all of our courses. They would be connecting with our library and media specialists as faculty may want to utilize articles or other resources that could have some copyright protection. So we need to seek all of those clearances. It's a lot of work to get it done right and to get it done well, but it's a value added most certainly for learners in today's college experience. A COVID consideration would be student surveys. Now here, we certainly have always invited students to complete a course evaluation at the end of every term, but this COVID spring, we connected with every student, and I do mean everyone, traditional undergrad, adult accelerated, graduate students, and our focus here was to ensure that they were continuing to feel engaged. Did they feel supported? Were there technical issues that were impeding them, broadband of their internet or access or trouble utilizing Zoom? Were there needs that they had more broadly in their family or in their employment or with their health? And so we were all hands on deck. Any concern that was identified, we responded to individually and directly, trying to make sure we were doing everything we could to walk alongside the students. Another focus of All About the Learner is how we try to develop active learning and authentic assessment. Assessments in college days gone by were perhaps Scantron, multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that kind of assessment, but it doesn't really match real world situations. I was a pro at spelling tests all the way through my grade school experience, but never has an employer said, Michael, take out a half sheet of paper, number it 1 to 25. This is going to be the deciding factor on this promotion. Can you spell all these words correctly in isolation? So it was a skill that I didn't flex and utilize in my professional life. How do we create authentic assessment experiences that really show mastery? Not simply can they meet the bare minimum criteria, but do they have the acumen to exceed that and to really move forward in some powerful ways? How do we help our students feel actively engaged in the learning? And that's an important consideration as well. So when we talk about active learning and we think about Bloom's taxonomy, how are we reaching those higher levels in that taxonomy? How are we engaging multiple modalities? An example here, Time was that a lecture would be given and students kind of passively took that in. So there was some auditory connection, but that may have been it. In a well-designed instructional experience today, we want to tap into far more modalities than only auditory. Now, there are some students who are auditory learners, but how else can we have them utilize and engage in that content? Perhaps they're hearing it, and ideally they're writing notes or they're processing it in some written form. That's a second modality. Ideally, they're talking about it, maybe themselves in a reflection, maybe with a partner or a peer group. And now I have three modalities being used. That's far more likely to not only pique the interest in the learning of the student at that time, but also equate to retention down the road. We also want to explore how the learning intersects and integrates with the student's own attitudes, values, and experiences. And again, that's learning theory. If I can activate an existing knowledge that students have, and I can find ways to integrate that with what they already know, they're far more likely to retain. As a teacher in the classroom myself, I also recognize that traditional undergraduate students today are digital natives. Now, that's not a critique. It means that they're really, really comfortable with technology. It's a ubiquitous part of who they are. For some, it's even a bit of a security because they want to have their phone within arm's reach at all times. At Concordia, we don't have a universal policy as to whether technology like that can be in the classroom. Some faculty are more comfortable with that than others. I have always operated under the idea that they're welcome to have that with them. I joke with them sometimes early in the semester, if they want to use class time to check social media, it's a really expensive way to stay connected because of the tuition they're paying, but that's their call. However, I feel a responsibility to be energetic, to be engaging, so that they do at least have a temptation to be fully engaged and connected with the learning that's happening real time. And there are some ways we can leverage that are pretty fun. One is just one example. I don't own stock in Kahoot, but it's a platform, a web-based platform that doesn't require a subscription on the part of students. I can post questions in Kahoot and display those within my presentation. And then students using a smart device can respond to those real time. Sometimes the questions are fairly rote, simple recall. Other times they're more open-ended and I'm asking them to give an opinion or venture some guess or hypothesis. The beauty is that they're anonymous, so it's very non-threatening, and it's also highly engaging. Students love to use their device, and so there's a way they can be connected in an innovative way. Another example of some active learning is something that our Academic Resource Center has done for many years, supplemental instruction, or SI, allowing students to work together to explore concepts, review class notes, discuss reading assignments, even doing some practice or simulated preparation for exams. Now, where this comes from, again, from learning experience and learning theory, when I taught, especially at the middle and elementary level, I was really trying to be committed to meeting the needs of students. And sometimes the first way that I taught something didn't make sense to its student. It didn't click for them. So I would labor to try to teach it in a different way. Now, again, time is versus time was. Some of my teachers growing up, if I didn't get something, they would explain it in the exact same way they explained it the first time, but maybe now with anger in their voice, not necessarily pedagogically appropriate, but it was kind of their go-to. I tried to be different. I was a conscious, reflective practitioner. I would try to teach it maybe 2 or 3 different ways. I would really labor in ways to get students' attention. And sometimes still, students weren't able to understand. But the piece de la resistance, if a peer would lean over and maybe utter 5 or 6 words to their classmate, often, suddenly, that was what they needed. They could explain it in a way that I couldn't. They could find a leverage point or a point in common, and it suddenly made sense to the student. So it underscored for me as a practitioner the power of peers. And often for students, that's a really valuable piece of the learning equation. And faculty at the college level have begun to embrace and recognize that as well. So real and fun and really functional. How does a typical university classroom look today? I'm an alumnus of Concordia, and as I think back to some of the classrooms in which I was taught and think about how those have been remodeled, and as we've put up new academic buildings, what are some of the hallmarks of those teaching and learning spaces? I would characterize them as flexible. We don't see desks really at all. We often see pretty narrow tables that can be reconfigured in a countless variety of arrangements. Often they have wheels on the bottom that can be locked, as well as the chairs. And so really there's no limit to how I can configure the learning space based on what I'm trying to accomplish and the experience I'm trying to create for my students. Classrooms are plug and play. Wi-Fi is absolutely, completely possible in any classroom, in any hallway, in any dorm room space, but we also have outlet plugs throughout the room so that when the battery goes low, there's an easy way to access power and to not interrupt the flow of what's happening. There's also a lot of writable space. One of the neat developments has been seeing entire classroom walls be whiteboard space or glass or plastic so that I can post sticky notes and use dry erase markers and visually conceptualize things. I can engage small groups to do that same thing. So they're really having experience in what often happens in the employment side when we're tasked with something and we have a project and we have to brainstorm and we have to get it to market. That same kind of effort and process happens there, and we're simulating that in some real ways within our classroom learning spaces. What does learning need to include post-COVID? Certainly, we need to equip our learners today with the ability to think critically, to communicate clearly, to have a connection to real-world needs and solutions, and how to be collaborative in some true and authentic ways. One of the ways that can happen is through project-based learning. So when I first started using this probably 10 years ago with my undergraduate and graduate classes, the response surprised me. Project-based learning, if you're not familiar, is really inviting students to think about something that would be engaging for them. To not have a single one-size-fits-all kind of project or assessment that everyone has to do, but instead ask students to think about something that piques their curiosity. What is a topic about which they'd like to learn more? And they plot out where they're going in their learning. Now, it's always in consultation with the faculty member. It's always connected to targeted standards or skills within the discipline, but it's a bit open-ended. What I was surprised about is that students, even 21st century students, even those digital natives who are naturally able to collaborate and connect and create in any number of social media platforms, were really stymied by the openness and the self-direction of a project-based learning experience. They bristled and said, well, Dr. Uden, can't you just tell us what we should do? But I really held my ground because, again, I recognize in the real world, there's not always a playbook. There's not always something that lays out exactly what the end is going to look like because it might be completely uncharted. And so the more we give students experience in those real world connections, helping them get important seminal feedback along the way, and then really emphasizing that the process of getting there is arguably as or more important than the product, we're starting to create learning opportunities that are truly distinctive and necessary in our world today. Lots of ways to integrate disciplines, so we have cross-curricular integration of lots of subject areas. The last point I want to make here is that not everyone has done online teaching in the last 2 months. A lot of news media and well-intentioned reporters have said all universities have moved all instruction online. But there's a really important difference between virtual learning, which I would submit is what has often occurred as a result of COVID, and online learning. Virtual learning is synchronous. So if I had a 10 o'clock lecture Monday, Wednesday, Friday, even when I moved online, I was often connecting to Zoom at 10 o'clock. It was real time. The pedagogy was very similar to what I may have seen in the 19th or 20th century, often lecture driven, maybe more faculty focused, and assessment could look fairly traditional as well. Online learning is asynchronous. While there are deadlines, my material as a student might be due by next Wednesday, I have absolute freedom as to when and how I'm going to utilize those tools between now and next Wednesday to get it done. We're using a lot of data-driven assessment and engagement tools. By that I mean that our staff, our case staff and our OSA staff can look at tools like Aviso or Blackboard Analytics, and they can see exactly when and for how long students have logged in to access their online learning resources. And if they've noted that a student hasn't logged in at all, they have a really framed, poignant way to bring that to mind. They can reach out and say, hey, I'm worried about you. I haven't seen you in your class at all this week. Is there something going on? Is there an obstacle with which I can assist? That creates a different kind of relationship and learning environment for students. A couple of wow moments from our traditional faculty, not all of whom have worked in this modality in the past. Dr. Mark Looker of our Ann Arbor campus did every one of his lectures this spring in costume. How fantastic. So he's an English prof, and he automatically grew the attention and engagement of a student simply by what they would come to see him be wearing in a lecture. Stephanie Godet, one of our English professors on the Mequon campus, reframed her writing composition class. It had always had a focus on storytelling, but in light of COVID, she had students produce podcasts and vlogs that really asked them to articulate their experience amid COVID. For many students, it was socially isolating. Their learning environment was abruptly quite different than what they would have experienced had they remained on campus. The factors of their family were often in flux in some really challenging ways. And so she harnessed that in a meaningful way to create a very authentic and engaging learning experience. The now what? Students, as we look to the future, are going to have some different needs. And what might that look like? One possibility is a residential learning community. So often students want to have that rite of passage college experience, but they also may want to work full time while going to school. They want to be able to participate in clubs and co-curricular, but not be encumbered by a set schedule during the day. And so what would it look like for colleges to have students living in the dormitory while they're fully doing all of their courses online? What would it look like to have partnerships where students are doing 2 years in a technical or vocational or a community college setting with an automatic partnership with a 4-year college or university that includes a wide variety of practica, internships, and externships? Concordia already has a grand variety of degree partnerships because of my office and the community outreach and veteran engagement, or COVE team, but we're looking to expand and exploit that even more in the future. Another demand is our digital natives have grown used to being able to access anything at any time of the day. And so how do colleges respond to that market expectation? We are not yet at Concordia able to have any need met 24/7 by a real person in a real time frame, but we're getting closer. At Concordia, our new inquiry management team, also made up of all Concordia employees, already responds within 45 seconds to an inquiry from a prospective student during peak daytime and weekend hours. And we're looking at ways to bring that same responsiveness to our academic support and service teams. Another future Hope, and something that we've already begun to do, but not across all of our programs, is having students exit not only with a degree, but with a competency-based credential that is recognized by their industry. That could be a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, it could be a QuickBooks certification, CPR, any number of things. But what will that look like moving forward? Finally, partnerships. Concordia and higher ed in general recognizes that our viability is tied to our integrity and our value added to the communities that we serve. And so we have a full range of partnerships with business and community partners that provide scholarships to students who are non-traditional or graduate. Business partnerships with academic K-12 districts, with Christian churches, with our alumni, and with our vets, just as a few examples. Man, I could go on all day because Concordia and other higher ed institutions in the greater Milwaukee area have truly pivoted from what has been to what needs to be. I sit on the steering committee of HERA, the Higher Education Regional Alliance, a collaborative of 18 southeastern Wisconsin public and private 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, and a network of partner organizations. HERA is committed to closing the achievement gaps for students and educating and equipping today's learners to be innovative solution makers for tomorrow. COVID-19 accelerated some of our movement in higher education, but we are on the same course to serve our entire region. And with that, I'm eager to respond to questions, comments, or concerns.
One second here, Michael. I have to unmute myself and start up my video. One of the questions we have is from the audience is, what program are you using at Concordia, DL2, Blackboard, or do you have a preference?
Our institutional LMS is Blackboard, so that's the one with which I have the most specific experience.
Question, Michael, I have is, because online learning is happening, you could see a day where there's one university in the whole state almost. Like, maybe there's just Concordia University, or there's just, because they could reach anybody. Has that come into play at HERA or even in Concordia, or how are you guys thinking about that?
Sure. Well, there certainly are some big players that have huge advertising and marketing budgets that have become part of our landscape in ways that they weren't 10 years ago. HERA, though, I think really embraces the individual differences of its institutions. We recognize that one size really couldn't fit all as we're trying to be a meaningful partner to a wide range of students and programs. Concordia is never going to be the go-to place for someone who wants to become a welder. So we need to have our technical college and vocational schools. We also recognize that our mission is distinctive, as is each mission for the higher ed players across our space. To lose that, we lose a diversity that is really meaningful. And in our diverse difference, we represent a far more comprehensive solution to higher ed needs, and we can be far more responsive into the higher ed space. So while COVID already has caused some institutions to have to close their doors permanently, and that's really hard news. I always hope we have diverse options for our marketplace, because that makes for better choices for students as they're pursuing education.
Another question here from Sheila. She'd love to hear more about the HERA group and where they can find out more information, or how do people participate, or can you participate in something like that? I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, HERA actually has a number of opportunities for the broader public to participate. And I'm going to try to pull up, I have it as a bookmark, so I want to make sure I'm giving the right information, but they do have a dedicated website that would be available for individuals. It's www.hera, Wisconsin, H-E-R-A, Wisconsin.org. And so there, an individual can learn a lot about the work that's being done by the collective, as well as upcoming events in which they could be engaged directly.
Excellent. Thank you. What about, I mean, you guys have such a beautiful campus. And it's like, right, I mean, people have never been to your campus. It's on the lake. It's
Come
like
visit, but not in
yeah,
South
it's pretty
July.
amazing. How do you, where do you see maybe the future of physical place playing, like maybe being not eliminated, but you know, the need to expand campuses and dorms and things like that? Is that something you guys are taking in consideration as far as enrollment and things like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I hope that there's always a way in which we can provide that experience for students who want or need that. There is a full spectrum of amazing campuses throughout our region, especially in the Metro Milwaukee area. And each of those offers so many fantastic learning spaces and group spaces. So one of my hopes as we look to the future, and this is true for all institutions, many of us have these amazing campuses that are largely underutilized, especially in the summer months. And as we partner with business and community partners, what are ways that we can open up our space? It's sometimes refreshing if I'm having a team summit to not have to do it only in my own workspace, but to be able to enjoy a change of scenery quite literally, and maybe have an overlook of Lake Michigan, and to be able to have that for a day. So how can we be a partner for our region and get them acquainted with our space, because it's an amazing resource. It is true, more and more students, because of convenience, not having to travel, love the online learning opportunity, but I always hope that there's still a place for the physical campus. And for some learners, that's their preferred delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from the audience here. How do you think colleges can engage graduates who may be planning to take, and we were actually just talking about this before, an off year because of COVID, so a gap year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key is for a young person, especially if we're talking about traditionally aged students who are just graduating high school, to be really mindful of the options that exist, because there are alternatives to a full-time enrollment. Sometimes there are students who want to survey some areas of interest in terms of possible majors, and there could be both pre-college and dual credit coursework for which they'd still be eligible, often at a greatly discounted price point, as well as the chance to audit coursework from a variety of disciplines or majors, or even professors who may be known experts within that field. And by taking the time to really get a full spectrum of what the options are and where the right fit is for you personally and academically, research would suggest, and Jeremy, you were speaking to this before we began formally today, the completion rate and the retention rate for students who take that gap year is actually well within. They're completing certainly within 6 years of high school graduation. They often feel more equipped and in a more mindful place as they head into their academics as well as their future vocation. So there are some advantages, but I guess my advice would be, even in a gap year, don't stop learning. Don't stop asking questions and exploring what is going to be a potential right fit for you when you feel ready.
Yeah, yeah. And according to the Gap Year Association website, and last year the people taking a gap year was up 294%. So it's a huge, significant. I mean, obviously, there isn't as big in the U.S. as it is in Europe. I think in Europe, everyone takes a gap year pretty much. It's more of a cultural thing, but
I'm sure we'll
it's starting
see
to
that
catch on here.
even more this spring. I think that's going to increase. But the idea that learning and the institutions of learning really are going to be a resource for all. We want to really be known as a way for lifelong learning to occur, whether that's a high school student wanting to dip their toe into college, whether it's someone wanting to explore how to retool mid-career, whether it's a senior citizen who is done with their work life, but they want to continue to engage in new learning and new experiences. Colleges of today, and certainly colleges of the future, need to really support learning throughout the lifespan.
Excellent. I think that is all the questions we have. So,
And apology that I didn't have my
oh,
presentation on full screen.
we have another question here. Sorry, that just came up. Have you seen this new type of teaching and learning is being able to talk to, or sorry, have you seen that this new type of teaching and learning is being taught to our future teachers?
I can speak to that firsthand because I had been the Dean of the School of Education for 10 years prior to my current role. And it was very much a piece of what we were equipping future teachers with so that they were really mindful of the needs of learners, the value in engaging learners, meeting them where they are and building those relationships, because that allows students to take risks in learning and to really authentically move ahead in progress. So I can absolutely ensure that for new teachers stepping into the field, this is part of their toolbox.
One more question here. How are managing accommodations as student engage with online learning platforms?
We have some amazing tools. Our Academic Resource Center has been able to offer all of the accommodations that they would typically have in a face-to-face format through technology resources, even in the virtual or digital format. So even things like having a reader, times were when I was in school, if a student needed to have a reader because of low or no vision, that was a student job where a classmate would sit alongside it and read the textbook. And now we have software tools that can convert any PDF file to a read audio file. And so it's amazing the tech resources that are available. The Academic Resource Center is one of the teams that I support directly. So I've been thrilled not only with the resources, but how quickly we were able to deploy them to students with exceptional academic needs.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael, for your time today. Appreciate it. This
Thanks
will
so
be
much.
recorded if you came in late on the NEWaukee website and the NEWaukee YouTube page. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure.
Take care.